All right. Well, hello and welcome everyone to virtual Thursdays and sometimes Friday and tonight Friday on a Dire Literary Series. And we've got a really great author and poet and activist, Michael Ansara, with us. And he's going to read from his new memoir, and then we're going to have a little discussion about it. Thanks for watching on the stream as well. Let me tell you a little bit something about Michael and Michael's book. It's A Hard Work of Hope. Um, and it just came out about a month ago. And a little something about Michael. He's been dedicated his life to activism and organizing, beginning with the civil rights movement in the 60s and serving as regional organizer for Students for a Democratic Society, SDS. He spent a decade organizing opposition to the Vietnam War. For the next 15 years, he was a community organizer, including the executive director of Mass Fair Share, a uniquely popular community-based statewide citizens organizing, fighting for economic justice. So basically, there's Michael. He is also the co-founder of Mass Poetry. He's a successful businessman, successful family man, and he has a poetry book that came out in 2022 as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Michael Ansara. And good evening, Michael.
Thank you so much, Timothy. It's great to see you and great to be with you. And, I was trying to figure out what section to just read a short excerpt from. And I decided to go back to the beginning because I know how hard it is right now for people to have hope, even though hope is an absolute necessity. Without it, we despair, we get passive, we give up, and we start to obey, which would be the worst thing to happen right now. So I went back to what first inspired me, and this is from the book starting in 1960 when I was 13 years old. I walk slightly limping down Harvard Avenue into Coolidge Corner with its stores and restaurants. Walking past Woolworths, I see a small group of picketers circling back and forth, carrying signs. After watching for a few minutes, I ask a tall young man what they are doing. He says they are supporting Negro students in North Carolina who were refused a cup of coffee at Woolworths and so are sitting at the lunch counter until they get served. Segregation has to go, he says. America is the land of the free, he says. Everyone has a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, he says. Negroes are Americans too. Sunlight filters on the sidewalk. I step into the slow-moving line, step into the movement, step out of adolescent despair and bleakness and into a new life. I do not think about what I'm doing. With impetuous certainty, I know my place is in that line. Only much later will I consider why I took that first step into a life of activism. I will recall attending the only integrated school in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I will remember a sweat-stained, tear-stained walk home from a lost fight in the Virginia twilight after a Little League practice when the other kids taunted me for going to that N-word school on the hill. I will remember the burnished mahogany cheek of the gentle nurse who took care of me through polio when at 8 years old I was confined to bed for months. I will feel ashamed that I do not remember her name. Quickly, I fall in love with the movement. I am in awe of those who sit in at the lunch counters, ride on the freedom buses, and register people to vote. Their quiet courage in the face of hatred and violence is stunning. They possess a ferocious dignity. The freedom riders, those sitting in at lunch counters, those lining up to register to vote, those young black bodies willing to be beaten, those new heroes of mine, are standing up to decades of terror and legalized discrimination. Southern white people had woven a tight net of laws segregating and subjugating black people. In 1960, it was illegal for black people to drink from white-only water fountains or to swim in white-only pools, to attend white-only schools, to eat or even sit at white-only lunch counters. Black voters were disenfranchised. Over roughly 80 years, the Jim Crow system was enforced by unyielding terror. Routinely, black Americans were beaten, shot, even murdered, lynched, killed for trying to sell their crops at market rates, killed for not stepping off the sidewalk fast enough to let white people pass easily, killed for trying to vote, killed for being uppity, killed for looking the wrong way at a white woman. The young black students and slightly older African American ministers challenged that terror and the legal system of segregation, sat in, became freedom riders integrating buses, marched, registered people to vote, challenged the decades old laws and violence. They were beaten, they were shot, they were jailed, water hoses turned on them, dogs unleashed on them, bombs exploded on front porches and in black churches. Some were murdered, and still they would not stop. Despite the beatings, despite the arrests, despite the shootings, despite the deaths, they brought legal segregation to an end. They integrated the South. They won voting rights. They changed America. How could I not fall in love with those young men and women only 6, 7, and 8 years older than I? How could I not dream of following in their footsteps? How could I resist the magnetic pull of such gigantic hope? I could not. I dove into the movement. I plunged in without any hesitation and with a fierce joy.
Well, wow. Very, very great reading and great segment that you read. I was wanting to hear more. I wasn't ready to join you.
Sorry. I mean, I could pick another section, but
No, this is perfect because it fits right into some of the questions that I'm asking you. If anyone has any questions also for Michael, just put them in the chat and I will get around to that. So you fell in love with the movement and you fell in love with the people doing the movement with what you were seeing. Did you have a mentor that kind of showed you how to be an activist?
yes, I was adopted by this marvelous group of Black organizers in Boston, headed by Noel Day and the Reverend Jim Breeden. Also, Sarah Ann Shaw, who went on to a long career in news journalism in Boston, but at that point she was a young activist. And I really don't know why they adopted me. I was, 14, 15, acne faced, naive white boy. And for some generous reason, they took me in and helped me. And they taught me about organizing. So let me take you back just quickly to Boston, 1962. In Boston in 1962, there was not a single law firm that had a senior partner who was black. There was not a single bank, not a single one that had a senior manager who was black. Building trades workers were shut out of the unions. Uh, Colleges didn't have black deans. And Noel Day and Jim Breeden decided to organize the black community to use their economic power to really break open that iron grip of racism in the labor market. So taught me to go door to door. We went door to door, and first we surveyed, literally several thousand black households as to what they bought. And then we analyzed what they bought, and we came up with this interesting target. Continental Baking Company. Continental Baking Company made that ubiquitous white bread, Wonder Bread. And they had a factory right in the middle of the black community in Roxbury. And they refused to hire any black people for anything except the most menial and low paid jobs. So we set up a system of block captains. We convinced the African American ministers to sermonize in churches, and we launched an incredibly effective boycott. And after weeks and weeks of boycotting, we won. We actually won 7 or 8 good paying jobs for black people. And all of a sudden, the threat of a boycott meant that banks would start hiring black senior managers. Law firms would start promoting black associates. And I saw through that how organizing is done and how it's effective and how that kind of collective action based on careful door to door, block by block organizing could actually loosen the grip of racism in Boston. And it was a lesson I've never forgotten to this day.
As you move from a civil rights activism to an activist protest, protesting the Vietnam War, describe how your activism changed, if it did.
Well, it definitely changed in that we were up against a war that in 1964 and 65 had universal support. You know, there were two senators out of 100 who questioned the war, no university presidents, no editorial boards. Everybody supported the war. And so we had to find a way first to create room for dissent and then to see if we could shatter the unity of the country around the war. So we worked on the campuses. Um, and, you know, a lot of the time, what people remember are the demonstrations, and we certainly had them, raucous, loud. Um, you know, we had marches down from the Cambridge Common into downtown Boston, and, you know, people were yelling and screaming at us, and they weren't yelling and screaming about supporting us. They were calling us traitors. And we had a whole range of demonstrations. McNamara came to Harvard, and we demonstrated and surrounded his car. But the key thing that we did, which I don't think is appreciated enough, is that we were constantly educating and engaging young people. And we weren't selling them. We weren't going to them and saying, hey, you got to be against the war. You know, I would spend hours in the dorms, hours in the cafeterias talking to people who were, you know, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. And so what are we concerned about? We're concerned about our lives. We're concerned about, you know, the pressure our parents are putting on us. What are we going to grow up to be? How can we have a meaningful life? And how can we do that in a society that is waging such an unjust war and might even draft many of us to fight in it? So it was that constant education. No one changed in one conversation. But slowly and steadily, as we educated and as the facts of the war began to be known more widely, we were able to build some real opposition. I have to say that over the years, that opposition took us in a significant direction that I can only look back and see as mistaken now. Not our opposition to the war, but first, as I said, we had to create room for dissent. Then we had to shatter the unity of the country around the war. And by 1968, that had happened. And at that point, we needed to change and lead a majoritarian movement. Instead, we saw all these folks who had supported the war coming over to our side, and we said, oh, well, we got to move more to the left. We got to be more militant. Not, hey, wait a minute. Now we have an opportunity to build a majoritarian movement. So in the 1968 election, I'm ashamed to say, in that incredibly close election between Humphrey and Nixon, it was even closer than the most recent presidential election. I organized people to vote in the street, vote with your feet, not vote at all. You know, the voting age was 21. I was 21. I didn't register and I didn't vote. And it's not that we were wrong about Humphrey. Humphrey refused to break with the war. He was a sad, hopeless candidate. But we were very wrong about the damage that Nixon could do. The millions more people who would die because of his policies in Vietnam, the black leaders who would be murdered because of his uh, policies here, the whole war on drugs that he would very cynically start to discredit the black movement and the anti-war movement, the unleashing of the FBI, the, you know, what happens when you have an insecure person who has no respect for the Constitution. And he started the Republican Party through his Southern strategy on the long march to becoming the party of white grievance and the party of Trump. We probably had a chance to stop that, and we didn't.
Back when I remember, the protests about the war in Vietnam scared a lot of Americans. We'd not really faced an uprising to that extent. Now, it's not as shocking these days, and with the universities being attacked, and with young people, uh, can they be organized? Do you think anything that happened in the 60s and 70s could happen successfully today?
Yes, I do. And I think I think a lot of young people are smarter, and I think a lot of activists are smarter. You know, if I could go back, symbols matter. I think we should have marched under American flags, not NLF flags, not Viet Cong flags, and we should have been singing "America the Beautiful." Um, and I think today protesters are more uh, understanding of that. And the No Kings demonstrations was really a joyous, patriotic set of demonstrations. The other thing I say is that I think young people will get into the fight in increasing numbers, but they face a very different situation than we did. When I first went to college, the economy was booming. I didn't have to worry. None of my friends had to worry about getting a job. What we were worrying about is, can we get a meaningful job? We didn't worry about crushing student debt. The costs were much lower. We didn't worry about whether we could afford an apartment and eventually buy a house. Housing costs were much more affordable. And we also had this onrush of the baby boom generation, which was this demographic bulge that made us feel powerful and optimistic. And so I think young people are in a slightly different position today, but I do believe that in increasing numbers, starting this fall, I think they're going to start protesting. I think they're going to protest in a more intelligent manner than we did. And I think they're going to organize to fight for their future. And when young people organize in America to fight for their future, that means they're fighting for democracy and they're fighting for the country's future.
Yeah. I also have observed that it's great that you mentioned the flag. It seems like the flag has sort of migrated to one end of the left wing, right wing axis. And so, do you think is protest? I mean, I'm a proud American that's not a Republican, and I can say that proudly. But I feel the flag was taken away from me as a unifying symbol. But in terms of protesting, do you still feel that protesting is still viewed as anti-American?
I don't think it's viewed that way by the majority of the population. I think it's viewed that way by MAGA and the Trump folks who want to paint it as unpatriotic. But, I think a growing number of Americans are feeling the necessity to oppose what's being done in their name. And, I also think that when I look back, I'm glad about what I did. I'm proud of it. I would oppose that war again. But I think by 68, 69, 70, we'd gotten into a very dark place. And a lot of us began to see our country as irredeemable. And when you see the country as irredeemable, then it's all or nothing, right? It's either revolution or nothing. And that means it's nothing because there isn't going to be a revolution. But when you see your country as flawed, but having enormous promise, and your determination is to realize that promise and to fight for your country, then I think you can have a very patriotic, flag waving movement that will be more successful.
Now, in the inner rooms of the planning stages of your activism, did things always go smoothly, or were there ever any conflicts in terms of how to do things?
There was endless conflict. And, also you got to remember we were kids. So, but particularly in the late period, the 68, 69 period, there was a lot of conflict. And, a lot of that was from the weight of the war. I woke up every single day for years thinking, I've got to be better. I've got to be better. And if I'm not better, more people will die. I have to do something to stop people from dying and dying in Asia and dying in Black communities in America. And, a lot of us were not up. We didn't feel like we were succeeding. I mean, now history, if you read carefully, history shows that we had a big impact. We, in a huge way, stopped Nixon and Kissinger from what they were considering. They were actually considering using tactical nuclear weapons, and they didn't because of the anti war movement. But our feeling of frustration and also our feeling of alienation really, in many ways, led us into craziness. And that craziness was fighting with each other and a politics that was way pure. It was like you have to be more pure than the next and untethered from reality. Of course, 1968 was one of those years which could untether anyone from reality. I mean, if you think about it, we had the Tet Offensive, we had the New Hampshire primary. Johnson says he's not going to run starting peace negotiations. We had the assassination of Martin Luther King, riots all across the country. We had then the Columbia student uprising, the Paris uprising, the German uprising, the Mexican students uprising, Prague Spring, and vicious repression of all of that. And then you had the death of the assassination of Bobby Kennedy and the election, the Democratic Convention in Chicago and the police riot. And so we were living in a time where it seemed like anything was possible because so much that was unexpected occurred every week. I mean, your head was spinning with hope and despair and hope and despair. And so it drove a sectarianism and a craziness in our politics that, for example, destroyed SDS. By 1969, SDS flew apart, divided by two crazy factions. And many of us no longer had a political home, and we had to find our way without a national organization.
What you just described in terms of the joy and the agonies of activism, which Michael Kasdan quotes he's from Georgetown University. Is that what he was talking about?
Well, there is nothing that can replace being part of a movement, being part of something that is larger than yourself. It is a wonderful experience. It gives meaning to you and it makes you feel a sense of solidarity, not as rhetoric, not as words, but as reality. I remember going back to my early days, in those black churches, arm in arm, singing and swaying till we shall overcome. It was just like balm to my soul. And even later on with SDS, when you're marching with 5,000 people, 100,000 people, 200,000 people for a cause that you really believe in, it's both exciting and fulfilling. And then, of course, you have the agony of not achieving what you so desperately want and not feeling good enough. And, all the time searching for how do we do this? How do we do this? And the enormous pressure. And of course, we were so young, both chronologically and politically. We didn't have mentors. We didn't have people to talk to us about our mistakes. And we had all of the impetuousness of youth. I mean, I look back, Tim, I go to Harvard, 1964. I'm 17 years old. I come into Harvard as an advanced standing sophomore. I have two jobs. I'm working in the dining room and in selling peanuts and popcorn for the home football games. And I have a side job doing house painting. I'm organizing the SDS chapter, and we have a meeting of a few colleges, and we decide we need to have two regional organizers. And I volunteered to be a regional organizer. And, I was working 18, 19 hours a day. When I think about it now, I'm just exhausted. But at the time, it was exhilarating.
Um, there's been, as you said, the country, what it looked like for civil rights from the 60s to now is a huge amount of change, but it seems to have reached the peak. Do you feel that we're moving backwards in any way as a country?
Oh, right now, the MAGA forces and Trump are trying to take us backward everywhere. I mean, they're trying to completely not only undo the progress that we made from the 60s on, they're trying to undo the New Deal. I mean, these folks are really radical. Not only are they authoritarian and despotic and are breaking everything, but their vision of America is one where we've rolled back the civil rights movement, we've rolled back the women's movement, we've rolled back the gay movement, and we've smashed labor unions, and everybody is obedient. I think we're facing the most severe challenge to the Constitution, to democracy, and to decency since the Civil War. And, I'd also say that there's a historic through line from the people that forced the Civil War to the people who are in the White House today.
So why?
Well, it's white supremacy again. And it's not just white supremacy, it's white supremacy that thinks that some people are better than others and that wealthy elites should have control of our politics. In those days, it was planters and cotton producers and cotton spinners, but today it's a whole range of billionaires and elite bankers, tech people, and so on. But it's the same philosophy, which is the elite should rule. Democracy is not to be trusted. You know, you have people like Peter Thiel, the tech billionaire, saying, you know, it's time for us to get rid of democracy. It doesn't work anymore. What he means is it doesn't work for him anymore. And so I think that philosophy, which is both profoundly racist and profoundly elitist, uh, has a historical antecedent in the pre-Civil War South and the philosophy that they espoused then.
All right, so the resurrection, January 6th. I'm going to take a different perspective on it just because it's fun to think. Um, so if there's a group of people that actually believe that an election was stolen, and that's anti-democracy in action, and they applied activism by charging the cap. Do you have any appreciation at
Oh,
all for the act that was
yes,
going on?
I do. And I have enormous sympathy for some of the people who participated because they had been convinced that the election had been stolen. And I asked myself, what would I have done if I thought the election was being stolen? I certainly would have mobilized. Now, I've come to believe that for our side, nonviolence is an absolute requirement at all times. And I would say there were many people in that crowd who were cynical, knew very well that the election had not been stolen, and were attempting to create a coup. But for your sort of average person who just believed what they'd been told by Trump, who they believed in, by Fox News, who they believed in, by their pastor, who they believed in, by their neighbor, who they trusted, that the election was stolen, I have a great deal of sympathy for them, and really think that we all should. But at the same time, you have to resist coups. You have to resist coups on January 6th, and we have to resist this rolling coup that is taking place now, where the Constitution is being completely trampled. Red lines are being crossed every week, and laws are broken every single day in that White House.
Last question. You earlier stated that the information being given students really helped influence how the war was protested in the 60s. How do we control? It seems like Americans today will believe anything they want to believe, what they hope to believe, or anything that is presented to them as fact. How do we get true information out to the people?
It's hard. It's hard. You know, we now have the technology that puts more information at the fingertips of more people than any time in human history. But it also puts misinformation out to people faster and more pervasively than we've ever seen before. And it's a huge problem. I'm kind of old fashioned. I believe that relationships matter. And so I think that the way to counter all this has to be that people talk to their neighbors, their friends, their co-workers, who they spend time with. And then those people have to go out talking to the people that they have in their networks. And we have to do it in a way, in a kind of old fashioned way. It's hard, it's laborious, but we have to have millions of people who decide they're going to be organizers. Now, they're not going to be paid full-time organizers the way I've often been. They're going to be volunteer organizers. But if we had, you know, 2, 3 million people talking and organizing and getting 10 million people to talk and organize, the only way we're going to survive Trump and the only way that we're going to really resurrect the country is through reaching directly and engaging with people, including people who disagree with us. You know, if we had just talked to the people who were against the war in Vietnam when we started, there would never have been a movement because everybody was for it. So we had to learn to talk to people, plant the seeds of doubt, connect with them. Now, I think we're in a very different situation today. I think there's a very clear anti-MAGA majority in the country. The problem is it didn't vote in 24. It's not organized. It's not roused, and it's not effective in organizing itself into the massive political movement that we need. But I think it is beginning to. And groups like Indivisible, the Third Act, the Union, student organizations that are springing up, climate change organizations, women's groups are all beginning that process. And I'm hopeful, uh, not naively. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I believe that we have to go back to some old school methods because, displaying photographs of Jeffrey Epstein with people standing next to him basically is not an effective offense.
Right. I mean, people are going to say, well, yeah, we knew that about Donald Trump. Um, it'll be interesting, though, on the Epstein thing to see what those right-wing influencers who've made a career and a fortune out of peddling the conspiracy, they're now in a tough place because their listeners and their income depends on them sticking to the conspiracy. But their loyalty to Trump is telling them, no, stop, shut up. So it's really interesting to see what happens on the right about that. But for us, I think we've got to always be talking about what people's lives are like, what they really care about, what they talk about over the dining room table. And a lot of that is economic, but also some of that is social and people being alone. It's a lot about healthcare. It's a lot about the cost of living, the cost of housing, the cost of groceries, but it's also about what kind of country they want to live in and being part of something larger. But we have to connect with them about that. The danger that we've got right now strategically is Trump is attacking and destroying, and we have to defend. But we can't be in a position where we defend a failed status quo. We have to talk about what kind of changes will make the country work and work well for the vast majority of Americans.
All right. Wise, experienced, and intelligent words from Michael Ansara. And if you enjoyed the conversation or just curious about the hard work of hope, which focuses on things 50 or so years ago, but still apply today. There it is. It's available from the publisher, from Amazon, and can be ordered at your favorite bookstore, whatever that might be. So, Michael, thank you so much for being with us. And for folks watching the stream, thank you so much for viewing.
Timothy, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I just want to second, please buy your book from your local independent bookstore. We really need them to survive, and that means we need you to buy their books. But Timothy, thank you so much for this and for everything that you do for writers and for poetry. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.